hearing some of the people from the State Department and from the CIA who lectured and gave adjunct courses. So I really was getting a good feel for the government from people I encountered at SAIS, and that encouraged me a lot about the Foreign Service. We served in Brazil, and we served in Afghanistan, we served ultimately in Israel for 8 years. And they were all so different. Jack Kennedy was elected. His foreign affairs advisor was Chester Bowles, a very leading liberal congressman at that time, former ambassador to India. And he came up from Capitol Hill with 2 aides, Tom Hughes and Jim Thompson, who worked for him there. And the State Department didn't know what to do with him. He was a great speaker, writer, very expansive man, brilliant thinker, traveled a whole lot around the world, a real idealist. Didn't quite fit the State Department model. And they wanted to have somebody in his office who would get him used to how things really happened and make his office function like the rest of the building. Somehow I got selected to be his special assistant for that reason. And that was the biggest luck break of my life. And through working for Chet, traveled with him to 80 countries around the world. He was representing the president in all sorts of special missions. But now I was traveling in Africa, Asia, Latin America, which were the 3 main foci of his interests and his missions, and got to meet a lot of fascinating world figures. And after 2.5 years of that, Johnson took office, and he asked Chet to go back to India for a second time as ambassador. Chet tried to persuade me to go with him. And I was introduced through that association to a lot of the big players in Washington, around the swimming pool at Chet's house in Georgetown on weekends and so forth. The Stuart Alsops and Joe Alsops of this world. But I didn't feel I wanted to go back to, I'd like to have gone to India, but I didn't feel I ought to be his assistant any longer. You're around somebody of that powerful intellect and personality, and you're writing letters for him, and you're writing memos for him, and you are writing speeches for him, helping him. You kind of lose track of who you are, because if you do it well, you've got to be able to work in the mode of the person you're working for. And I kind of was losing track of myself, so I thought I'd better get free of Chet's aura and magnetism. Then Carter was elected, and I enjoyed that job. It was quite new. I made a lot of speeches around the country. I spent a lot of time in New York with the Security Council. And I spent a lot of time struggling with whether the PLO was going to be able to speak before the Security Council, which we were trying to block. And I used about 50% of my energy on the PLO problem in New York for a while in that job. So I got the beginnings of familiarity with the diplomatic problems of the Middle East, the Arab-Israeli dispute, through that job. Through a series of interesting things I won't bore you with, suddenly I was asked to go out as ambassador and vacate the job when the administration changed. When Carter came in, Andy Young, who was his new UN representative and very close personally to Carter, hated Richard Nixon. So he told Carter he'd take the job, but he wanted everybody out of the mission in New York and the bureau in Washington who'd ever had any kind of appointment from Richard Nixon. Well, if you're a career officer, you have appointments from all your presidents, and most of the ones I work for were Republicans. So I was, Cy Vance, the new Secretary of State, had good things, heard about me and wanted me to stay there, but he wasn't going to pick a fight with Andy Young over this particular issue. So they looked around for an embassy to ask me to take. And they suggested 3 possibilities: India, South Africa, and Israel. I never thought of Israel. Been there once. I was with Carter at Camp David in all the peace treaty negotiations, and that was really exciting when we achieved the peace with Egypt. Then I was there while we had the war with Lebanon to try to get the Israelis out of Lebanon. First get the PLO out of Lebanon, then get the Israelis out of Lebanon. And that was a painful but very challenging time, working with Phil Habib and the President and Secretary Vance and Haig and then Schultz. But 8 years was 8 years. Reagan asked me to stay on so I was there first term of Reagan as well. All of Carter, first term of Reagan. And then I retired because I was really worn down to a nub, and they'd offered me some other jobs in Washington, but none of them could bear comparison really with the challenge of Israel at that time. In all of these jobs, I have to say the kind of education I had at SAIS, the atmospherics of it, the camaraderie with people with similar career ambitions, and the continual flow of people from this city who were really in the game and could give us a sense of what the game was going to be like, made SAIS a very special place. It was exactly the right place to go for me at that time.